Welcome to the Behavioral Groups Podcast. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We interview interesting people in order to unlock insights into behavioral science and how we can apply that to work and life.
And this week, we got to talk with James Brewer, Director of Incentive Compensation for Eli Lilly, one of the largest pharmaceuticals in the world. Full disclosure, James and I go back a number of years, and I have done a number of consulting projects with him, co-presented at a few conferences, and consider him to be a good friend. And as typical, our conversation covered a lot of different topics.
Well, some of the topics we covered started off with a lightning round of quick questions. My favorite part is the Michelangelo versus Monet thing. We discussed the behavioral IC audit, the incentive compensation audit, that Kurt and James did a number of years ago, and about how asking people what they want, particularly when it comes to pay and rewards, probably isn't the best idea.
Yeah, that say-do gap that keeps popping up in our conversations with a variety of different interviews. We also talked about Lilly's work with Dan Ariely and some fun insights into that, as well as we spent a great deal of time talking about the 4-drive model of employee motivation and how that can be applied at work.
Yeah, that was terrific. Once again, we had some really good discussion after the formal session ended and talked about how do you know something worked and what outcomes really matter.
And so listen up. We hope you enjoy this Behavioral Grooves podcast with James Brewer. All right. Well, James Brewer, welcome to the Behavioral Groups Podcast. We are excited to have you here. So a couple quick questions. Very first up, speed round to start this podcast off. Are you a cat or dog person?
Dog.
Monet or Michelangelo?
Monet.
Nature versus nurture?
Nurture.
Nurture. All right.
Okay.
All right. So Monet. Now that I would not have picked you for a Monet guy. Now,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
Monet?
Oh, I just like the color variations. It was something that always, believe it or not, it was one of those classes, art history, actually. I probably spent more time. It was one I walked into the class thinking, oh, geez, just check the box. I walked out going, I could have majored in that. I don't have an artistic or musical bone in my body, but I absolutely can spend hours in an art museum, or I can in a concert hall, and it can be a range of wide music. In fact, I find myself sometimes wasting time watching some of these auditions when I see this talent pop on people that don't know they're good singers or artists or comedians or whatever. I just like what people can do, and especially things that are unique.
Yeah. So James, I think that was our fun little pop around, get us going here, get some energy onto the deal. But this is a podcast about behavioral science, and I know we have done a lot of work together past 7-8 years, and you have brought behavioral science into the work that you do. But I just want to go back and think about, can you tell us a little bit, how did you get interested in behavioral science, or behavioral economics as we used to call it when we first started working together?
Well, the simple answer is I needed a better way to communicate.
Okay.
We had complex incentive compensation programs at Eli Lilly, and we were doing perfunctory communications. Do this, get that. I was new to the role. I looked at that, and while we were checking the box of getting something out, it wasn't what I would call engaging. And so I knew there had to be a better communication. And I remember coming up in the first time we met, it was all focused on how do we better communicate. Mm-hmm. You quickly, within 1 or 2 hours, said, we got that covered. We can help with that. But I want to introduce you to something broader. And that was the first exposure. Now, when I started, I think you'd asked, had I heard much about behavioral economics or behavioral science? And I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever told you this, behind was going on in my mind was this sounds like behavior modification. I'm not sure I'm going to like this. Because I come from a biology background, and behavior modification with animals and stuff feels really controlling and manipulative. And so there was, as you're walking through the discussion, I'm like, okay, this is sort of people making choices. That's not behavior modification unless there's electric prod, and you weren't introducing electric prodding to it. So that's
a later
really
time.
Focused on better communication. And at first we don't realize how we communicate and what we communicate, when we communicate, can have a science behind it. And that's really where I saw the connection between the two. And I felt like, and I'm still feeling like I'm in a fire hose drinking this, because it has such breadth of impact and applications.
Well, I remember in our first conversations that one of the reasons actually that we even started talking about behavioral economics, different things at that time, is that some of the executives at Eli Lilly had read Dan Pink's book, Drive, and had bought into that. And I know we had talked about that in some early conversations. And I said, I liked that book just from the perspective that it got people thinking beyond just compensation, that there are other things that motivate. And I think that resonated, not resignated. I need a beer or something before I do these. Resonated with you. So help us understand how you use behavioral science and behavioral economics in your work, and how did the executives, I'm kind of mashing a couple of our questions together here, how did the executives buy into that, or what was needed for that?
Yeah, you're right. The Daniel Pink, it predated me by about 12 to 18 months, and it had gone through one of our executive VPs, Michelle, had read behavioral economics, had her lead team. They were applying different constructs, not so much in their incentive design, but really they were doing it in their leadership interactions. That was the first time I'd read something, and I think during that first introduction when we were talking, I had referenced it, and I remember you saying that's a good start.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I read a book on it, therefore it was the end all to be all. So it was done.
Which is often how that
do you mean it was a
right?
good start? And what happens in large corporations, at least Lilly, and I'm sure it's relevant elsewhere, is one VP is doing something, the others look over and think, well, that's interesting. And there was intrigue. Now, we happen to have our president of Eli Lilly at the time had a background. His undergrad was in economics. And so he latched on, and he was familiar with that work. And I remember having literally a hallway conversation referencing it and saying, this is intriguing work. And he was intrigued with the conversation. We ended up scheduling some time, and it was broader than behavioral science dialogue, but that weaved itself into it. And I shared with him that I'm investigating and trying to understand how to apply it to our incentive compensation. This was following the conversation you and I had with Alex Azar, who happens now to be working up in Washington. And Alex had a real keen eye for it and an interest. And as we continued, I want to say within the first 12 months, through that dialogue, Alex wanted to have a deeper dive with our senior leadership. And so to the question, how did it occur? Yes, there was some nurturing that was going on with one VP working with Daniel Pink's book. Alex knew that was scratching the surface because he had done a little more homework and wanted to go deeper. And we had that, I remember, as a Friday afternoon, 4.5-hour session, and the VPs were asked to come in, many of them grumbling, saying, why do we have a 4-hour meeting on a Friday afternoon? Came out saying, this is absolutely going to change the way we think about doing our business.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that meeting. Tim was there as well.
Both of you were present.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I remember the level of engagement was very high. That the enthusiasm and questions and the way that they approached it was really inspiring. Because
I think the first thing that was so important to them was all of us had a business need. Now, it may be not clearly articulated, and each one of them might have had a slightly different variation on it, but it really came down to how do you increase productivity? And the interesting thing is there's lots of ways to do that. What they saw, engaging employees is a significant way to increase productivity. And part of that is people get focused on the work, clear the clutter, get lasered in. And I think this became an additional lever to do just that. And as a senior leader, they were looking for ways to engage, to ultimately drive productivity to the company. And yet when we state that, it sounds obvious. The question is, how do you do that?
Right. And I think it's interesting.
And many of them, I think the message you guys shared was you can offer people more money, but that may have diminishing returns.
Yeah. And that's one of the interesting things. Question I have for you, James, is we've done a lot of work with, I've done a lot of work with other organizations, and they don't seem, for whatever reason, that this message of applying behavioral science doesn't necessarily catch on at that senior executive level. They can't take the science part and take it down to that business message that you talked about. Any ideas why you think Lilly was able to do that and they did it relatively quickly? Is it just the people that were in the room? Is it something that you did? Is it something that we did? What were some of those things that you think that allowed that to happen?
Well, I think there's a little bit of all of that, right?
Okay.
So our current CEO, Dave Ricks, back in 2012, actually predates that, 2010, 2011, was president in the U.S. affiliate and had actually introduced what we called the service value chain.
Okay.
And it really was work that came out of studying other companies that had engaged their employees to increase productivity. And we really simplified. There's some really complex models that came out of Harvard, and Disney has one, and Zappos has them, and some of the top performing organizations outside the biopharma industry. We went to look at how do they give wonderful customer experience. How do they get to that? Well, it came all the way back to the leader has to engage the employee whilst the customer makes choices to drive business results. That's the simple construct of a value chain. Mm-hmm. But it comes back to the crux. How does a leader engage an employee? And so that question was stirring in our company. And we didn't have good answers, I don't think. No, we had certain mechanisms. We had at that time we called it Spotlight. Now we call it Inspire. These are merchandise points that you can reward and recognize people, and there's badges, and all that's good. Won't discount that. But it seemed one-dimensional, and there wasn't a lot of depth to it. If this was really true, meaning leaders can engage employees, which then impact customers, if that line connects, then we need to be much more thoughtful around how do you do that. You can only read so many leadership development books.
Right.
And at some point, they work or they don't work, but there's tactics that can be engaged or deployed systematically outside of your indiscriminate leader, because leadership is really hard to do.
Okay.
And so at a senior leader level, they needed to institutionalize, at least within the sales organization, how do we incorporate incentive compensation, rewards and recognition, so not just the cash side, but the non-cash, to drive better performance. Because the leadership is very indiscriminate, and we had 300, 400, 500 sales leaders. You're not going to have consistency across that many, but you could put a process in place And that, I think, was the door that was open. Now, what we had to do is we had to actually connect those dots.
Yeah, so James, why?
To show that this was something that could be systematically deployed to achieve the outcome that they were trying and desiring.
Yeah, so James, why was the sales organization chosen as the guinea pig, for lack of a better term?
It's the largest function in our organization. At that time, it was just shy of 5,000 persons and had the highest operating expense behind it and had the largest revenue driving component within our organization. So you're just looking at a functional area that was the largest. Marketing team is 1/20th the size of the sales organization. So if you go into marketing, you can have a breadth of impact with the marketing, and we've extended it into some of our patient adherence programs and things of that nature. But just from a functional area, that happens to be the largest area, and it's also the most conducive from an incentive compensation because we had a high variability in the way that we established incentive compensations. We were much more flexible in that environment than we were in our bonus structure within the other functional or the other business functions within the organization.
So could tell us a little bit about that. How did you start? What were the first things that you went after to start to apply these behavioral science principles in the sales organization? What were the things that you started kicking off first?
First thing we did is looked at our communication. In fact, that's what drove me up to Minneapolis was I didn't think we were communicating well. Now, I quite frankly didn't walk in and say, well, I'd like to have business or behavioral economics or behavioral science applied to my communications. I just wanted a more systematic approach to communication. What I learned was, walking away from that, is yes, we can make better slides or better PowerPoints or better apps or whatever the tool might be, but behind the scenes, why are you communicating in this manner? Why are you choosing to have certain items being repetitive? What are you highlighting? What are the options that are the different rewards? That was step one, communication. The second item we did was a true audit of what were all of our rewards. In fact, we had a very systematic audit of this. What were all the awards that we had available, both cash, non-cash, as well as recognitions, so rewards and recognition? What were the list of all of those? And where did we, and how, and what levers were they pulling? What we found is over 95, 98% of all of those awards, and we probably had 15 to 18 different rewards and or recognitions across the organization. Most of them were all pulling the same lever, and that was the desire to achieve, which is fine. It's a powerful motivator, but it's leaving a couple others really out there, and we weren't maximizing our opportunity. And so that audit demonstrated to us that we had a gap. Out of that audit, the second thing we did beyond just audit categorizing it, we then went to our field and did a survey. And we said, well, what engages you? And of course, number one, everyone should be able to pull this out of the hat, and that is cash. Cash is king. Don't screw with our cash, right? And so we had to look at all these other things. We had team trips, award trips, and we found that they were highly, highly motivational. And we knew that intuitively, but we didn't know to the scale. And so the question is, why aren't we maximizing, why aren't we leveraging that at a much more impactful manner in the way we communicate it, the way we articulate it, and quite frankly, leveraging it because it's a year-long award, leveraging it all the way through, and leverage being a good thing, motivating all the way through the end of the year. Even though you might have had a bad quarter, you had 3 quarters collectively that you could make it up. So that gave us some sense. We start with the communication. We then did an audit to understand and it was the first time we'd really audited all of our rewards recognition, then went to our field and said, what engages you? Now, notice we did not say what motivates you. Yeah. And I've learned that there is difference between that. But then that we knew just by the design of the reward or the recognition. But what we didn't recognize was they're motivating people differently or engaging individuals differently. And the 4 drive model gave us laymen, I'll use that term, interest in behavioral science, but behavioral science can be very broad, and we needed some tool to be able to condense and communicate what we were trying to achieve. And so that tool helped us engage or understand how we could categorize these different awards and to actually put them into one of these 4 categories to then understand what the impact was as we deployed them across our sales organization.
Yeah. And I remember you had mentioned that team travel award was rated really high, and we knew that. And as part of that work, in the 4 drive model, what I found really interesting about that is that touched on all 4 of the drives. So we have the drive to achieve and acquire, which is, that key one. It's the one that most people think about when you think about the tools that you have to motivate employees. It's money, cash, things, all that kind of component. But the team award also had the drive to bond and belong, which is that we want to feel like we're in a group and have positive relationships with our teammates. And by being a district level award or an area level award, it allowed those connections to happen. Then there's the drive to challenge and comprehend, that learning, that challenge, the goals, different things. And obviously teams were focused in on achieving the goal in order to win the award. And there were some significant challenges oftentimes in district achieving that. And then the last one, which is that drive to defend and define, in feeling that sense of purpose and aligning with the organization. Those awards allowed Lilly to have, which was surprising to me, because it allowed the teams to feel a sense of connection with Lilly from a broader perspective. And so I thought that was really an interesting concept. And as we looked at that and we looked at how those impacted all of those drives, I thought that was really something that was unique in the way that award was structured.
It was. I think the other piece is it helped educate our leadership that one award, such as this team travel, could pull on multiple different levers. We tend to try to think of things as uniformity, that everyone's going to have, there's an A, there's a B, each one of these categories are equally the same for everyone, when in fact that's not true. But what we found with the team award was, yes, there's a bond and belong, but some individuals didn't do it to bond and belong. It was relevant to the company, right? So I personally may not be so motivated to go on a trip with my business colleagues, but the company thought that was highly valuable because they wanted us to be much more collaborative in our work environment. And so it was a unique award, not only those receiving it, but also gave benefit back to the company. And I think that's one of the things when you were asking earlier, why was the company engaged in this? They saw that the organization could gain some benefits, some priorities that they had to achieve while also impacting individuals. And in this case, it was this construct that we believe that collectively that team of sales individuals could work better together than trying to compete against each other. And this award allowed that to occur.
James, one of the things you mentioned about the 4 drive model was that it was a tool to convince as well as to categorize. But I was wondering if you could give any tips to the podcast listeners about how to get senior leaders to buy into behavioral sciences.
Yeah, I think I thought a little bit about that in a bit of the journey. I think I have to put it in construct or thinking that I approach a lot of things. I come from a sales background, and I find that as a worthy profession. And a good salesperson first tries to understand the need and then match the solution to the need. If you're trying to sell a solution that has no need, you're probably not a good salesperson. And so understanding what are the needs, in this case, what were the business leaders trying to accomplish, and understanding that, and then demonstratively showing how the constructs and the understanding of behavioral science could be applied. Now, if we did not have a tool to apply it, systematically and repeatedly, we were going to have significant problems. Wow. Meaning, if we walked in with a series of 20 different, well-documented, studied behavioral impact from various studies, and just arbitrarily went through those, the eyes would have glazed over. And they're like, great, so glad I learned that. They want to know application. And this created, very succinctly, give them an overview, and we were able to say, now, we're not going to try to apply every one of these principles or these studies that we see as replicable, but here's your problem and here's how we can solve it. And what we saw our problem was we wanted, going back, to have leaders engage employees to drive better outcomes for our patients, particularly for our business. How do you do that? Well, in our world, we were demonstratively using this achieve lever, and it felt very old school by the time we exposed them that there are other levers to engage employees to drive impacting their customers. And all of a sudden, this door opened for our senior leaders to start having other levers than one that they felt was very exhausted. Because really, achieve and acquire is pay people more cash. And at some point in the sales world, pay me more becomes a mantra that is not, you can't defend that, either in the healthcare space or just on your bottom line. You've got to be able to engage people beyond just paying them more cash.
Well, and James, we've talked about this in the past, where Lilly as an organization had made some strategic decisions to shift. And you had mentioned that the reward and recognition and incentives had not necessarily caught up with that change. And so that was one of those needs, I think, that you identified with the senior leaders to say, hey, our reward and recognition program hasn't maintained the same level of driven the same strategy that the organization is now moving to. Would you agree with that, or am I misstating what we've talked about?
No, that goes back to that strategically the organization had moved to this value service change. Yep. Simultaneously focusing, ultimately putting the customer, even our selling model went to a value-based selling where it used to be put the product in the center, do feature benefits, right? That's the classic sell. Here's the benefit, here's the feature benefit, sorry. We actually shifted that, patient in the center, understanding the patient through the needs of, in our world, the healthcare provider, and matching our different products or our different solutions back to the right patient so that it became a valuable conversation between our sales reps and a customer. So we had our selling model change. We had our strategic change. We even recognized within the healthcare business world that we were moving more to a team environment because our customers work as in the healthcare environment today, work as a team, not as individual sole practices. And so there's these things going forward, but yet our incentive compensation program had not been updated since 2001 when it was developed.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's remarkable that you step back, and by using the service value chain as the service profit chain as a model to say this is how we want to engage our customers, and therefore how are we going to engage our employees so that they can be supportive and engaging our customers. That brought the customer to the center, and then this behavioral layer gets applied to that with the drive model, and really enhanced. The results were significant, as I recall. Right?
They have been very significant.
Yeah.
I think there's two key things that popped to mind. One, our workforce by design is becoming much more diverse. Many times we look at that in classical standard, categories of diversity. But to me, those classic categories actually come out as really the diversity is, and that's where my comment very early on, nurture versus nature. Nurture, we actually think very differently. We're motivated differently for lots of various reasons. And the interesting component around behavioral science is, done well, it can pull out that across that diverse organization different motivators, because that diversity is there. The leader, and this goes back to us as leaders having to engage employees, I may not be well suited to engage a very diverse population. Well, but because I'm going to be biased to my own diverse motivators. And we had a systematic process. So it was, everybody is going to be focused on achieve. Set a goal, let them achieve it, get paid more money. But across the organization, that's not always the case. It may be a fraction of their motivator, but they may want to be bond and belong. They may want to be competency driven, or they may want to fight for the patient and defend for the patient. That's why they're doing their job, or variation. And so this really gave that leadership an opportunity to realize that they had multiple levers that they could incorporate. And really it came back to just recognizing we had a whole profile of rewards. All we had to do is start shifting them either in better communication or shifting them and say, you know what, some of these are truly just recognition reward or recognitions and not rewards in the sense of cash. Master performers was one of those for our top performing district managers over time.
So you dealt with diversity in the workforce more by their drives rather than, as you mentioned, sort of the classics like ethnicity or gender or age, those kinds of things. And you still had great results.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I'm not smart enough or I can't. Either way, same outcome. Put a program that says I have a diverse incentive compensation program based on the diversity profiles within our sales organization. I just can't see how that could be executed, right?
Right.
But what I can do is understand that if I build an incentive compensation program that has layers of different motivators to engage the employee, then I don't have to worry about the connectivity back to each and every profile that's sitting in a sales force of 3,000 or 4,000 people. I just have to recognize that, and that's where the 4 Drive model really enhanced our ability to systematically test the different rewards and categorize them. And many of them, as we talked earlier, such as the team award on the award trips, cut across all of them.
Yeah.
Some of them, a sales goal was really focused just on the achieve lever.
Right. So, James, Lilly has taken behavioral science and now used it across the organization in a couple other ways. And so I wanted to just get a quick overview of some of the other ways. I know you were headed up the fleet safety program and brought that in there. I know that you had mentioned some patient adherence components. How else has Lilly used behavioral science inside the organization?
Currently, there's a group that within our training organization that is looking at the training content and how they're deploying the training and motivating and engaging individuals. You mentioned the patient adherence. The two that I, of course, went deep on is the incentive compensation and our overall fleet safety. I think with the patient adherence is really coming from our marketing organization, recognizing that in a cost-constrained environment of healthcare with runaway cost, and we know that we're running against it. One of the arguments of a biopharma space is that if patients who I've heard on average take only 50 to 60% of their medicines, if they were to sustain on the right medicine for longer periods of time, then they would have better outcome with lower hospitalizations, lower casualties of whatever that disease state that they're involved in. And so the question is, can a biopharma company improve patient outcomes? And there, I think we have 2 or 3 different studies evaluating that. Now, that's work that Dan Ariely is involved with our marketing organization. And it may be tools in reminder items or motivational or checklist or multiple different mechanisms outside of the medicine itself. The delivery device, reminders. Some of them may be electronic, some may be Bluetooth apps on the phone. But that's where I think the application of behavioral science is so broad. And as I've become more and more a student of that, I actually see it being done to me in lots of things, be it at the coffee house or the airlines or even the checkout at the grocery line. And I'm not opposed to it. It's just becoming more aware, and it does work because I'm still drawn to it. The gas filling station. I mean, they all have these little nuances of engaging us in different ways.
Yeah. Which brings me to another question then. So how do you see behavioral science having been, kind of brought into this through your work? How do you see behavioral science impacting things in your personal life? Or do you see it? I mean, are there any ways that you have applied behavioral science to help you in your personal life? Or as you said, just the noticing that, hey, there are these nudges all over. And sometimes it's good to be aware of the nudges, not that the nudges are bad, but at least be aware of them.
Well, you're a husband and father and, active community member. And are you applying any of these behavioral principles to your personal life?
Yes. So on a personal note, I hit a milestone birthday this past year in 2017. And so this time last year, I really evaluated, similar to what I'm doing each year through the week before the last week of the year. I always sit down and sort of look out what are some key things that I'm going to do differently. And those are just goals, 2 or 3 personal. In my case, there was one I wanted to have a better fit body. And I'd always classically worried about losing weight, just like anybody else during the holiday season. I decided I'm going to shift that. I want to focus on body fat. And so I did a lot of homework on what does that look like. And then I had put in certain milestones that created motivation to me throughout the year. I had a ski trip in March, so I was going to have stronger legs, and I put some milestones on achieving certain goals on the 10-day ski trip, miles down the hillside. But to get there, I had to hire a personal trainer that could help me get there, and we worked through those, and I wanted to work out 4 days a week. 2 of those days with a trainer, that's accountability, and then 2 of those days of myself. And those were just simple goals, but there are little triggers that I found myself having to put in place because I knew that by end of February, it was really easy to walk away. As a parent, we've set up some certain accountability items with our teenage kids when it comes to their finances. They are given they had to first give us budgets. They then have accountability to manage those budgets on their own. It's been interesting to be able to not only teach them some life lessons, but also be able to hold them accountable. They thought it was fun to each month to get a bucket load of money, $100 a month, and but then they had to start breaking that down and to realize that this wasn't just for games or movies or fun. This was really something very different. And so we've applied it into, I'd say, some daily task and being able to demonstrate to them in the case of the kids, they were much more accountable. They were able to make some decisions. In the case of the learning, they had to be competent in managing their money. They were able to defend their purchases, right? Yeah. So they were acquire purchases. They were able to choose if they were going out for a coffee or a hot chocolate, I guess, for the teenagers, with friends. They were able to create that ambiance without having to ask mom and dad for $5. And so it's been interesting to sort of see some things that it really helped us refine items that all of us do every single day. And I think the interesting piece is it works.
Yeah.
And knowing yourself is critically important to know where you failed in the past. And so where are you going to create little triggers to achieve whatever that goal is?
Yeah, I like the trigger conversation. So if you had one hint to give to the people listening to this of how they can use one behavioral science aspect or one hint around behavioral science to improve their life, what would that one hint be? Tough question.
Well, that's a tough one. Yeah, that's broad.
You don't need to answer it.
No, actually, the reason I was thinking about it, I think the reason I'm pausing is because I'm going through all of the different types of items that they could go through, and I'm like, well, that would work in this scenario, that would work in this one, not that one, and then I'm thinking about the diverse audience, and you know what? If I had to give them a tip, it was probably the thing that organized my thinking, not only at Lilly, but also in my own life, was I keep going back to this model. And I know it's a tool. It's not, but it helps me. And that is the 4 drive model. Get a hold of the 4 drive model and at least identify what are some of your motivators. And then apply that to the different things that you're interested in. And what I found with that, and it's so easy, A, B, C, D. And it's a tool to at least organize some things, and it can be laid on to just about any aspect of goals, aspirations. And then I think that at least helped me structure this breadth of a scientific field so that I didn't get overwhelmed. And then
did I ever
letting you ask more questions.
Did I ever give you the 4 drive assessment? Did we go through that together?
No, I don't think so. I know I went all the way back to the original study with Nohria and Lawrence and started researching that once I started realizing that this was applicable, but I don't recall actually taking the study.
I will have to get you. It's in beta, but I used it at Lilly with a number of your district managers, and so I thought I know.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, so I thought maybe you had taken that, but I'll get that to you so you can actually get a much better sense of the different drives that you find to be most motivating.
I gotta say though, James, the fact that you went back to Lawrence Nohria's original work to discover it yourself, I think you now officially qualify as a geek.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I am.
just admit it. You like it.
I do get passionate about things and can go pretty deep on strange items. The fun thing is the information's at your fingertip, and you just have to, that's what I think when we start talking about why am I motivated to this and not that? And I was really intrigued with that question. And then some of the things that we don't want to do but know we should do, that's really fascinating. And what do you do to trick yourself into it? And I use that term with parentheses around it. Trigger is another one, but it works for something different. For me, it's accountability. If I have somebody waiting for me at the gym, I can't let that person down. And so I show up.
Yeah. Well, James, I just appreciate always your questions, because you have raised a number of really good questions as we in all of the years that we've worked together in various different things. I always enjoy the way that you think, because you think about things in a very big picture yet very application kind of focus, and so it's a really nice mix of those two that you bring to the table. And I'm always really appreciative when we talk, because you bring up some really interesting stuff. I remember some on the fleet safety, and you're talking about how we can use loss aversion various different pieces on that. So
the conversation meandered a bit until James brought us back to something that he wished we had talked about earlier, and that's where we pick up the conversation now.
When we talk about the success of, I think that would have been the one element of how do you know if it worked or not?
no,
And I think on each one of those components, so two that I think are really powerful. One is on the incentive items. We've had 7 consecutive. I think there's 2 levels of success that we can attribute back to behavioral science. One is we've had 7 consecutive years at Lilly of exceeding business plans results. I think that's one. I think in challenging years, these were not given. This was the 7 years that we achieved results. The second is when we did an audit in 2015, we had 85% of the employees fully comprehend their incentive compensation program,
which was
and I think
up from
hugely
45%, right?
Yes, massive. And so I think how we were communicating, and I think, when we say what's the most important thing is understanding, is critical. In fact, I remember what Alex Azar said. He goes, I don't give a damn if people, quote unquote, say they're motivated. I want them to understand and create action. And I thought that was a really intriguing comment, because what he was really saying is people don't understand what motivates them. So I don't care if someone articulates, and I know, Kurt, you and I talked about this. One of the worst questions we could ask is, are you motivated by this? It's irrelevant, because I may or may not be at the moment. I answer the question. The question is, are you creating action? And I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings I've had with the application is asking someone, are they motivated, is very different than observing their behaviors, which is, to me, more important.
Well, we've had the conversation.
Their opinion.
Yeah, we've had that conversation about how people don't understand their own motivations, right? If they understood what motivates them, then anytime they set a powerful goal that they want to achieve, which many people do, but yet still end up failing, oftentimes because they don't really know what are the motivators and what are those things that are going to get them past all the hurdles that they're going to have to face in order to reach that.
Or derail them and so forth. So I think one was what were the outcomes? And then on the fleet safety, having a program where we got a 35% reduction in collisions. I mean, 35% reduction. Wow. Q3 2016 versus Q3 2017. And it's not just a correlation. We did a direct causation. But we interrupted them with, and I think, so we did 2 things that I think were really intriguing. One, when talking to Dan Ariely, when I asked him, through behavioral science, how do we stop people from texting and driving? He said, you don't. You interrupt that behavior because you can't not. It's stupid, and you need to stop it as fast as possible. And this supports some of his beliefs that at some point technology or interference with one's behavior because it's destructive needs to happen, right? You can't modify or adjust it or let them choose to change. And I think that was his you got to stop it. And so we did use technology to stop their texting and driving. But one of the more interesting ones was loss avoidance. And that was everyone was immediately rewarded. XM radio. With our buying power, we got it down to $11 per person per month, which is pretty cheap. And as long as they stayed within their driving saving, we call it point system, right? So they had to stay at 4 points or lower, and they were able to keep XM. If you went over that, we turned XM off, and you were telemetrics, which is tracking your driving patterns, is turned on. Well, what was fascinating is when we started the program, historically, we've always had around 200, 220 people with 5 points or higher across our fleet. And and some people would drop off, other people go in. It was a very fluid, different people, but the numbers were pretty constant. Since we've rolled this out over the last 5 months, we're now down because points drop over time, but no one's going back on. And so we're down to like 56 people with greater than 5 points. So not only did we interrupt and stop the texting and driving, the distracted driving, which is broader than texting driving, we stopped that. But then we also, with this loss avoidance, and it was fascinating. Kurt, when I came back to you and said, "Do you think this is going to work?" Your comment was, loss avoidance is one of the most powerful motivators, regardless if it's a big item or a small item. When people have something, they want to hold on to it.
Yeah.
They just want to know what do they have to do to not lose it. And we articulated that, and we're down from running 200, 220 MVR points 5 or greater down to 56. In fact, my safety team came over to me just about a month ago and said, "Do you think our data's right?" I said, "Well, is it the same data you've been polling for the last 2 or 3 years?" They said, "Yeah, but they've never seen this drop." And I said, "Well, remember, this loss avoidance was intentionally put into place to create that behavior, that we don't want people in that unsafe area, because what we correlated with about 85%, the predictive model was with people with 5 points or higher, they had an 85% chance. Now, we didn't do this. This is actually with a 5-year study from Virginia Technology Institute. They created this, and I called it a probability model. They kept calling it a predictive model. That just sounded too accurate, predictive.
Right.
After we monitored in 2015, it was 85% predictive. I was like, and they said, look, this is the same data that insurance companies use. They're not in business to go out of business or not be profitable. And so it was truly predictive at who's going to be in the accidents.
Wow.
And the characteristics of those people, right? And so that 5 points or greater was really lining up. And so we had to figure out how to get people below that 5 points, and giving them a reward for staying under it seems to work.
Well, it's
the combination.
It's that combination. And I remember us having those conversations about how do we implement this? What is the right type of a reward, and what can be used from a loss avoidance perspective? I had not heard the results of that, though. So that's fantastic. Going down from over 200 to just roughly over 50.
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh,
no, and it's really been interesting. It's this combination of technology. It's a combination of reward, recognition. It's changing the behaviors, and this was probably the most visual program that we've done thus far, because it felt really, really personal to our sales force. You're in your car, and you have a system in your car now that shuts down your phone except for phone calls when you're moving, and it felt like really invasive. So there was a lot of negativity on this. So it was critically important that we got results, and it was quite frankly, it was thrilling to see a 35% drop in our collision rate.
Yeah, way to go.
And that's so you're saving lives, right? I mean, that's what this comes down to is you're impacting people's livelihoods and saving lives with it. And yes, it was invasive. We thought long and hard on how do you communicate this and how do you roll this out to make sure that people were accepting of it and various different pieces. But the results that's fantastic, James. I didn't realize that.
It's been so. Those you were asking, Tim, and I think probably the outcome of this, if I had to just quickly, is in both cases we've had some strong outcomes that were very powerful.
And so with that, I think we're kind of wrapping up here with our time, but we
have to talk about music. We have to talk about music, James. So the question is today, what is your theme song today?
My theme song today. Oh boy.
This is the
I've got
hard
teenagers,
question that we
and I
ask
was listening to something like
all of our interviewees, all of our podcast guests. They always have trouble kind of formulating this. So,
well, it was funny because I've got teenagers, and I was listening to some music last night, doing some reading, and my wife came over to me and said, "Seriously, you're listening to that?" I said, "Well, the kids were listening to it, and I still like it." I wouldn't call it my theme song because I don't think I could repeat it. So I'm gonna move. You know what? To me, boy. You know, I'm listening to a lot of Christmas stuff right now, and I think that I like a lot of instrumental. I'm going to go with a band or a group, and that's Platonics. And I just like the instrumental music for this time of season, and it's got a lot of depth to it. But I listen to a lot of genre, and I think some of the stuff that I listen to when I was teenagers, I don't believe I could repeat some of the stuff that goes on there.
Who's the band? What is it that Platonic?
The Platonics.
Okay, I've not heard of that.
It's a acoustic vocal group.
Okay,
Check them out. They're outstanding.
We will get that information. We'll put it in the show notes, and people can link to it if they want to hear some of the that type of music. So that'll be great. So James,
no, they have a lot of seasonal genre, but it's in fact I guess I listen to it a lot because my 15-year-old son. We were up last night cleaning the kitchen, and he goes, "Is that Platonics?" And I'm like, "You actually know them?" She goes, "Well, yeah, you play them enough." So I guess I do have spillover effect on the kids too.
It's amazing what we have on what we don't know actually impacts our kids, and what we sometimes think does is not always.
But I will tell you, I've been banned from playing too much Adele. So apparently, the last couple of years, the family
banned Adele. She has such a.
Apparently, when you hear it nonstop for every time they get in the car, "Hello" comes on, and I have a chorus of 4 people in the car saying "Turn it off." Apparently, my Adele days are limited. So if you ever wonder what James is listening to when he's driving by himself, yes, I still go to Adele, but apparently I'm overdone it.
The difference between social James and private James. There we go. So,
yes, it would be Adele.
Well, James, I want to just say thank you. We really appreciate this. Very informative stuff, and so we appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time, James.
Well, happy New Year to both of you.
Thank you. Welcome to our grooving session. This is where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavioral Grooves interview, or just have a free-flowing discussion on some topics that we want to talk about. So,
didn't go into the crazy mind thing today.
You talked about that with me last time. I learned this is one of those things. People can change. Or I just didn't read the script right. Anyway, so Tim, impressions of our talk with James Brewer.
Monet versus Michelangelo, the speed round question that he thought so much about. And I just love how he had this perfect rationale. It was very quick. Actually, this was a quick speed round question, and it surprised me that you could ask Monet versus Michelangelo and get a quick answer. And he said it was about color, and it spoke effusively about Monet. And I thought, wow, that was kind of cool.
James is a unique individual in the way that he processes information. It's one of the things that I have always very much appreciated about him. He takes a different view, and I think that view is actually a really positive one and a really insightful one, and sometimes a very enlightening and fun one. And I think you nailed it on the head. He had a specific rationale as to why within a matter of seconds, and it was well thought out and well spoken.
much like the way Adele is completely out of bounds with the rest of his family because he's overplayed her. I thought, and again, very quick. He was right there with it.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
I could see where Adele would be one of those factors.
I'm being somewhat sarcastic.
Yes, I know.
But I have to admit that I thought the discussion about the 4-drive model, the Lawrence and Nohria model, was really great, and the work that the two of you have done was, you've used this model at length, and it was a really good discussion. What did you think about that, Kurt? Do you feel like it sort of did some of the work that you guys have done together justice?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I want to reiterate is, we started using the 4-drive model, James and I, typically where we really focused it in on the rewards component within the organization. And it has some great aspects within that around rewards and how you structure an incentive compensation plans and how you build the other factors that go into those. What has been, I think, something that I'm proud of, and maybe it didn't come out as much, is that the 4-drive model has gone and grown beyond just the incentive component within Lilly.
How you're using it?
How it's being used inside the organization.
Oh, okay.
And so we have done management training sessions around the 4-drive model so that district managers understand how they can apply the different drives, the different motivational drives with their team. So that they're not always having to think about, well, how do I pay this person more or get them more money? But how do we work with improving, somebody to be motivated around their bonding component? How do we put challenges out there for people that are going to be something that is going to motivate them? How do we align people's individual passions with the organization so that they have that drive to defend and feel like they are a tribe and that this is something that they feel worthwhile in defending? And so that has been across the board from that, but also in some work around patient adherence and also in work around fleet safety. And, the list goes on. So it has taken on a much broader context than just within the reward and recognition field, and I think that's really powerful.
So as a model, the 4-drive model has been a very powerful tool for what problems you've tried to solve. It sounds like it's been a very effective tool.
And I'm typically agnostic around which models. I'll use whichever model works. What I find fascinating about the 4-drive model is that it has its power because it's simple. So most models you want to be relatively simple from an application perspective, right? The more complex they get, the various different things, the harder they are to actually implement in a manner that is going to have some actual recourse within an organization. Yet its simplicity also belays, this element of sophistication with it that says, yes, it's simple, yet it has these components that people go, yeah, I think about that, and that makes sense. We are human. I understand that element, that drive to bond, that component there. So,
yeah, that is really cool. I think that is really cool, and I get where you're coming from on sort of being agnostic. That use the right tool for the right problem. Like you just because you have a screwdriver and you really like the screwdriver doesn't mean that that's going to do a good job of putting the pictures up on the wall.
Screwdrivers are great for pictures on the wall. I don't know what you're talking about. You turn it around and it's a hammer and you got a screw and you're absolutely right. The factor is that you use the tool that is best fit for the job. And in some organizations, that's the 4-drive model, given that component. In others, it brings in a different motivational model or different elements of behavioral science. And so don't get married to one particular way of looking at the world. You need to look at it from a multitude of different perspectives.
One of my favorite things that James said, which is something that you and I have done a lot of work in, is don't ask your sales reps if they want more cash.
Because what's the answer going to be?
We know the answer. Yes, yes, yes.
Of course. Everybody it doesn't even have to be salespeople. It can be line workers. It can be anybody. If you ask them, hey, would you like more money? The answer is always yes.
It kind of has to be. Our brains would be, working sideways if the answer wasn't yes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our motivation is actually derived from that preference.
Yes, and the key piece there is understanding that people do ask those questions inside organizations, and oftentimes the results that they get. Because they implement on that question, right? They implement on the answers that they get, and the results that they get aren't what they expected.
And James's approach was to not ask what motivates you, but what engages you. And I thought that was a subtle but important difference, to try to talk about what are the things that engage you in your job on a broader level, right?
And we did it in a really interesting way too. So we looked at this from both an interview perspective as well as in surveys and a variety of other things, but we asked it in a multitude of ways. We did past, what engaged you in the past? What was the most engaging time that you had in this job? We asked about future, what do you think is going to engage you moving forward in the future? And we looked at some other ways of doing that, but when you take all of that together, what you get is, I think, a much richer perspective on what is actually engaging.
How do people typically answer the what will engage you in the future? What's the kind of responses that you saw to that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, again, answers on any one individual are going to be across the board from any other individual. Were
there some overarching themes?
There were, and I'm trying to remember back. And I think in across the board, there's a couple different things. Obviously, money, rewards, those types of things. People talk about, they bring up, and again, this gets into, some of it might be priming and some of it might be, just what they know. But they will talk about those big recognition trips, the President's Council, for Lilly, it was their achievement trips and various different things. Because those are so vivid in their memory and they have such a powerful component, money comes up as one of those factors too.
Sure.
Again, it's one of those different pieces. And the interesting thing in pharmaceutical, and this is across the board in all of the work that I've done with pharmaceutical or even med device companies, there is a subset of individuals who are talking about working with patients and seeing the impact that they have on patients.
The virtuous aspect of the job.
The virtuous aspect of the job. And it comes back into, you hear stories. You hear stories of, my mother has diabetes and I've seen what it's done to her. And so I want to, take that. Or my sister had Parkinson's. And so I want to, know and help people in that situation because they have some real world experience or empathy around that.
Yeah, and in some of the work that you and I have done together, Kurt, with pharmaceutical reps, I'm surprised that, of course, it's prevalent, that virtuous calling, if you will, that connection to the work on this virtuous level is prevalent, but it wasn't universal.
No.
And that was a surprise to me. I anticipated that if you're going to get into being a drug sales guy or you're going to be promoting medical devices, that you really love the product, that you're really, but not everybody is.
No, and I think some people go into it because it's a sales job and it can be a highly lucrative sales job. And so people go in for a variety of reasons. It's like, again, you look at that, I think you could take any industry, you could take any role, and you are going to have some people who go into it because they love the impact that it has. Accountants, right? Yeah. And they're going to really glom on to what it is about the job that is meaningful and impactful and purposeful and all of those factors. And other people are going to look at it as just a job. And sometimes I think that happens because we don't understand the job when we're applying for it, and we don't understand what it actually implies. And when we get in there, it's not exactly what we wanted, but it's paying well, and so we just stick with it or whatever that would be. And other times I think it is actually purposely sought after. They do understand it. And so I think there's that difference.
Yeah. Did you have any other observations that you wanted to share?
I was just very happy. James is typically very, 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 very long-winded.
He's going to love that when he listens.
He knows this. We've talked about this. And he did a really good job.
He was great. He was great.
Of not doing that. I will tell, and I think I've told him, so when he listens, if I haven't, here you go, James. But whenever he would call, I would answer it if I knew I had an hour. If I knew I had less than an hour, I would politely leave the phone in voicemail mode and call him back when I did have an hour, even if it was just for a simple question. The conversation was for a full hour.
Well, but it's clear your affection for him is strong. You guys have you guys have a great relationship.
Yeah, he's a good guy. So
okay, well, let's talk music.
Oh, okay.
We're going to do music. Oh. What is? Okay, well, we don't have to.
No, music is good.
We don't.
Music
have to.
is good.
Okay, so what are you listening to these days?
So I have been listening to a multitude of different things.
Wow.
Well, I always do. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But the band that I'm liking a lot is Down Like Silver. Really strange band name.
Down Like Silver.
Yeah.
Okay. Love that.
And so, but again, they are in the mode of Angus and Julia Stone. Have a great male female singer within it, and they're the haunting kind of music for me, and so I really like that. And then I will go back and I listen to my my punk Husker Du components that I'm listening to and getting excited about because Bob Mould is going to be playing. We're close to the Super Bowl here in Minneapolis as we're doing this, and he's going to be playing down on Nicollet Avenue, and I'm thinking of going and seeing Bob Mould.
He still rocks it out.
He does.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
So there you go. Very different on the genres.
That's great. You always listen to a wide diversity, though.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And you?
Well, so you had mentioned Angus and Julia Stone in a previous podcast, and it really got me thinking, well, why don't I know anything about these guys? And
they're from Australia. That's why.
Well, so when you told this story about how they opened the concert with trumpet, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So I started listening to them and really dig their sound. And when we were just talking about this, they do remind me a little bit of Iron and Wine, but completely their own sound.
Yes.
I don't know who's producing them, but they've got a great sound, and I really like it. So I've been listening to them. And last night I was out, and I love local music, so I'm going to promote the local music scene. A buddy of mine, Nicky Pepper, that's Nici. Nikki, Nici Pepper, Pepper, ER, and so she was playing last night with another friend on percussion, and gosh, if you just got to check out Nicky Pepper because she's got a great voice. She's a tremendous guitarist, a good songwriter, and she just really knows how to. She's a very natural singer, and she does it. She sings in a way that is completely convincing, and just kind of wins you. It just wins me over, really, when I just listen to her. She's just really convincing and authentic in the way that she sings. So
Nicky Pepper,
yeah.
I'll keep an eye out. So, and with that, please, people, if you find this at all interesting, give us some stars. We realize we haven't asked that before, so we're making an ask. If you like this, please rate us with 5 stars or 4 stars. If you're going 3 or 2 or 1, send us an email. Tell us what you don't like about it because we want to make this better and give you guys what you want. But as always, listen to our podcasts on wherever you listen to your podcasts. Podbean, Apple, whatever it would be.
Have a great day.
Be groovy.